Hello, everybody. Welcome to live discussion number 4. Dr. Tamina Wagner today. I need to stop using sunscreen references in this course while I'm also not using enough sunscreen. So I hope everybody's doing well. I hope you're staying cool if you're in this part of the country where we're roasting. We're about to have our third day in a row of 90 something degrees and 90 something percent humidity. So that's awesome, living on the surface of the sun. And ironically, tonight's conversation is about prevention. And I think I did have a prompt for this one. So let me just take a look. So it says over 85% of all healthcare costs and 75% of deaths in the United States of America are consequences of preventable health issues. Obviously, we all have to die of something, though. So I'm not saying people should stop dying, but um, lifestyle choices and health behaviors are the most important health concern in this regard. Why do we think it's so difficult to get folks to take preventative care like wearing sunscreen, seatbelts, I do religiously, helmets, religiously, condoms, healthy eating, physical activity, sleep, managing stress. And so what are we doing well in some of these areas? What do we still need to work on? And how does our healthcare system perhaps contribute to the issue? So that's kind of a lot, but not really. I'm old, right? So I always use the Ghostbusters reference. I don't know if you've seen the original Ghostbusters when he says, choose your destructor, and the Stove Puft Marshmallow Man comes along. And he's like, what? That's all I could think of. Anyways, choose your destructor is kind of how we die in the United States, right? When we're dying of chronic illness, it's often because of, not to discount genetics and environment, but lifestyle and behavioral choices really are the big ones. So we essentially, not that we like to talk to people at their end of life saying, well, this is what you got, this is what you chose, these were the decisions you made. But, if we are ignoring our blood sugar and our cholesterol or our stress, if we're not sleeping, if we're not connecting to other people, if we're not managing whatever life is throwing at us at the moment, there's direct evidence that that correlates with ending life earlier. So health coaching can be kind of fun in that regard because then we can help intervene with a person. Generally, when they come to us and say, hey, I'm really thinking about making this change. And then we can help them figure out how to do that. Health behaviors, unfortunately, are kind of disregarded, at least in our culture. Everybody knows how to eat healthy, right? Everybody knows you should be active. Everybody knows, and then everybody kind of thinks this is just common knowledge. Everybody gets it. Like, what could a health educator possibly give us? How could we really need help? We just need to figure out how to do the thing. And it's like, well, right, that's the magic, is figuring out how to do all the things. Like, I know how to eat healthy, but that doesn't really like feed my feelings all the time, right? Or help me feel the things I'm trying to feel from food. When we're celebrating, we're not like always choosing healthy things, right? A lot of you were talking in some of the things I was grading earlier on choice negotiation about like drug and alcohol use or unsafe sexual practices. I mean, there's reasons why people do those things, and it's not just because they're too whatever lazy or undereducated to know what to do. It's that the doing of it can be very difficult. We have a very famous paper written in my field, and it's called "Our Health Education, Our Health Educators Warriors Against Pleasure," right? This idea that we want nobody to have any fun, like hide your whatever. When I used to work for DKS in the summers, I would join them at lunch. I like to eat in the dining halls anyways, and they would like, don't look at my plate. I'm like, I just gave you a whole like 40-minute lecture on how this is not about judging people's decisions. Look at my plate. I'm not judging. And so there's that idea though that, oh, you're going to take all the fun out of it. And I do think I take all the fun out of a lot of things. Like I go to bed early and I whatever, right? But even in some of my classes, some of the things I teach could be really fun, but when you teach about it at this academic level, it's not always that fun to think about how to prevent all of the things. But there are mechanisms. And really, we have to help people focus on their years of quality life. So I noticed in this course, I'm still kind of mixing in the Healthy People 2020 and the Healthy People 2030 stuff. Unfortunately, that's partly on me for updating things. And then partly there's a lot of issues right now with government websites. I'll just put it that way. And so gaining access to some of the things that are really contemporary has been just a little bit problematic. I know in one of my spring classes, my advanced sexuality class, we were having difficulty accessing even just like basic data stuff. And so while that was going on, it's like, well, let's look at 2020 and 2030. But so that years of healthy life, though, really started for 2020, where it was like, there's going to be a time beyond which, at least for right now, people aren't going to live. Like we celebrate, oh my gosh, you turned 100, right? It's not like we regularly have people turning 150. And maybe the technology will get there someday. I don't know. But in the meantime, that we call it the compression of morbidity, right? So can I live as long as I can, but also spend as less time in those later years unhealthy? And people struggle with illness and chronic disease, and things happen. This is not meant to blame or make people feel badly at all. But I've watched our grandparents uh, spend time in nursing homes after a stroke, right? Or when they lived for all of these years, but there really wasn't much life in their living. Some of them didn't know who they were or where they were or what was happening. And that didn't mean that they didn't have value for those of us that loved them, and they weren't still a part of our lives, but it was definitely a very different way of spending the end of their life than my fantasy is that I just like my dog right now. We had 5 animals. We had 2 dogs and 3 cats 3 years ago. And now I have 1 dog. It's kind of sad. It was a very rough time period. And it's like, I want him to live as long as possible, right? But I also want him to be as healthy as possible in these end parts of his life. And so I do the similar kinds of things, right? Watch his diet, watch his physical activity. Today it's hot. He loves being outside. I keep putting him on a timer. He's like, Mom, really? I'm like, you're panting, like you're coming in. I'm not allowing you to get heat stroke because you think you're okay. So all of these little micro decisions, sometimes we categorize them as like lifestyle choices, right? End up, some of them are habits and routine, and we don't even think about them anymore. So trying to get people to take preventative action with something that they've always done this way can seem a little silly. I mean, here again, not to be a jerk, but like my anti-sunscreen campaign is maybe a great example. Like I could get away with not wearing sunscreen when I was 20, perhaps, right? But like my skin does not respond and recover. My body does not recover in the same way now that I'm over 50. And so the damage that I might be doing to myself is maybe compounded by the fact that I'm not taking that, I'm going to say quasi-simple preventative action, right? And then not to make this about me, but all of the other reasons, right? Sunscreen is expensive, it's annoying, you have to keep doing it, it sweats off or it washes off, you have to pay attention to the time. The whole point of recreating for me in the sun is not having to worry about those kinds of things. Those are the barriers, right? Why don't people just work out? Why don't they just sleep 8 hours every night, right? There's barriers in there, if you want to go back to health belief model, that sort of override the benefit of choosing the behavior. I just don't want to. These 9th grade boys I worked with one year said to me, Lori, you cannot ask a girl if she wants to have sex with you. And I said, you can't? Because we were talking about consent. And they're like, no. I said, why not? And they said, because she might say no. I was like, well, that's the point. Like, are you trying to sexually assault people? No. And then they went on to explain, it's kind of better to just try and see, and you'll know if you need to stop. And I was like, no, 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 no. Okay, this is an important prevention moment, right? The lack of getting hit is not sexual consent. And so prevention, right? Again, simple things that we can put in between us and problems that we might have with outcomes based on whatever it is we're about to do. We can't prevent everything, right? When I first came here to do grad school, my friend Lori, ironically, her roommate was a vegan. She ran marathons. She was just the picture of health. She did a lot of spiritual practice in her church. She was the person that we were always like trying to be. But the second semester of grad school, she died. And it was like, okay, wait a minute. Here's someone that did all the right things, I'm putting that in air quotes too, and still ended up with a life that was cut very, very short. So we want to be careful about not presenting a direct correlation, right? Like if you do this, you will do that. I was just telling my niece the other day because she was studying for some placement test for high school. And I said, oh my gosh, that's the number one thing I have to fix in my students' dissertations when they're writing. They'll tell me, like, if a person does this, they will blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, they will? Like, you can guarantee that, right? Isn't the language more, they're much more likely or they're very likely, right? But to say they absolutely will, that's a little definitive. That's a little too much confidence. And so in prevention, we can do all of the right things and still die of the things. Cancer is a good example, right? For the longest time, there's like a weird spider web. Sorry, I'm never in my office at this time of day. The light's all different. Um, and then there's menopause brain. Oh my gosh. Mallory, do you remember what I was saying?
I just got distracted by the
I
spider web
know.
that I saw in my
I
house.
know. At least we're all in the rabbit hole together. Prevention, preventable death. Oh, it's gonna be good too. Whatever, it'll come back to me some other time. Um, but then I do get caught on like, what the heck, really? But maybe that should be the question for the people that aren't here tonight. Where did Dr. Wagner lose her way? They'll be like, right from the beginning. Um,
Oh, something
V.
about your niece, maybe, that she was doing?
Oh, yeah, it was. It was V. What were we talking? Oh, just the thing that I correct with the students' paper. Yeah, just to say that we can't guarantee something. All right, you got me back on track, Mallory. Thank you for being a team player. Um, and so that idea of guaranteeing, right? If you do this, this will happen for a person. And so there's that kind of makes prevent, like I can do all those things and still die. Nicotine, that's what it was, smoking. And we used to blame the smokers, right? And then we found out, wow, actually a huge percentage of throat, mouth, tongue, lip cancer is HPV. So then my people, right, the sexuality people are like, yeah, we knew that. But it was real easy to say, well, the smoker, and then they'd be like, well, they got throat cancer and they never even smoked. And it's like, well, right. But that's not necessarily a reason to initiate a not so healthy health behavior. Is that it didn't kill other people. My spouse chewed tobacco for like ever, and he'd say, my grandmother lived to be 92 and that she was fine. I'm like, great. But that doesn't mean that that's how it'll work out for you. And so, anyways, fortunately, he walked away from that habit. But that can be a huge thing, especially because we're usually fine till we're not, right? I mean, my students will say that in class, like, oh, that they don't understand all the why us old people, they don't quite use that language, are so concerned about texting and driving. It's really not that difficult. And it's like, well, I don't know. How do you feel about driving when you're intoxicated? And they're like, oh, no, 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 that's terrible. And it's like, well, yeah, your risk of getting into a crash when you're intoxicated and driving is about 4 times greater, 8 times greater, depending on how intoxicated you are, than when you were sober. The risk of crashing when you're texting and driving is 20 times higher. And that's because when we're intoxicated, we're like, ooh, snap, I had too much to drink. I better be careful. Or they're police officers like, am I going to make it? Right. Not to say that we should ever be drinking and driving, but that's generally people are like thinking about it, versus when we're on our phones, even if they're attached, our brain like goes someplace else. And our attention to the details that might be important are problematic. And it's not just texting and driving, it's eating and driving, or sexing and driving, or, playing with our makeup, or uh, messing with the radio or whatever while driving. Those things can all be pretty problematic. Um, and they're fine until they're not fine, right? And so the more times I participate in those things and I don't have a consequence that I'm unhappy with, it kind of encourages the repetition of that behavior. So then sometimes prevention is just, first of all, like let's say we want to help prevent heart disease for someone, or cholesterol issues or diabetes related to diet. And it's like, well, how is your diet now? And they'll say, oh, it's pretty good. And then we don't do this, but most of my colleagues and friends right around me are the dietitians, right? So they'll have people do like a food diary and they'll keep track of everything. And then they'll say, well, actually, wow, your calories are blah, blah, blah. And I don't do this work, so I shouldn't really be giving the example, but it's like, oh gosh, I didn't even realize that. And so then trying to help them incorporate little bits into their activity as well as their intake, then can help them find a more healthy balance. Because then people will say it's far easier to stay fit than it is to like kind of let ourselves go and get back to fit. It's far easier to. So most of these preventative things are a little time consuming. They're not generally the easiest choice, right? It's not really the thing we like instinctively go to. We generally have to train ourselves or practice the things until they become habit. That was part of that trans-theoretical model or stages of change that helps to show us where people might be in their progression of behavioral choices. And then once we really take it on, it really becomes incorporated, then it's a natural thing. I was watching my family with the littles at the party, I guess yesterday, and how religious they were with making sure the sunscreen was getting on all their little kids, and I thought, wow, they're really committed to that, and they were really like paying attention and taking better care of their kids than we all were of each other. So, in any case, I think one of the big pieces, and I guess trans-theoretical model is a good thing to bring in there, is that those pre-contemplators, right? So the people who maybe aren't thinking about changes that might be helpful to them or that they might be wanting to make. And so in some of the theories, you'll see that cue to action piece where it's like, oh, all of a sudden I get this moment where I'm like, oh, wait, now I really want to do something about this. And that's a great moment we can try to catch as a health coach. So really unpacking in our brains all of the things we hear our clients say, right? They might be talking about stress, or they might be talking about, I'm trying to think, because on that exam there was an example, but I don't think I can talk about it just yet. So I might come in and say, oh, I'm just exhausted, I'm stressed, I'm not eating well, and I need to be more physically active, and I really have, whatever the thing is, all the things. And then it's like, okay, wow, that does sound like a lot. Like, where do we want to start, right? Which of those things, rather than like our deciding which is the thing, with the education of those all sound like great things, and also if you're not sleeping, right? Like even with diet, diet, sleep, pardon me, and cholesterol and blood sugar are very closely related. And so it's like the person might do all the other things, like I'm restricting these things in my diet and I'm increasing these things expenditure wise, but then I'm not getting enough sleep or I'm not. And it's like, okay, well, this is part of that dynamic status of all the different dimensions of health where they all work together, and prioritizing one over another isn't really, all that healthy in the long run if we think about the big and whole big picture. The last part of that prompt was about whether or not we think our healthcare system helps with this or detracts from this. And I think that kind of depends on how you access the healthcare system, right? So again, first we have to recognize that we should access or could be accessing the healthcare system. And then it's all about, not sort of how we're connected to it, right? What benefits does my employer give me? We had a dental emergency at the beginning of last week. And then how it feels like your social media is like listening to you. So then all these things are popping up, and there was a meme about how my healthcare covers everything except my eyes and my teeth. like those two body parts somehow don't count. It's like, I know, and dental is so expensive. And then they make you feel like, why weren't you here? And it's like, because you're about to charge me $3,000 that I don't have, right? But that's because he's having to have a tooth, right? He got extracted. Now he's getting an implant, so he still has a tooth. So probably had we done smaller things way earlier, we might not have gotten here, right? But again, it's like, well, I get this much insurance. So it's a negative loop in the brain, right? Versus, am I going for all of the things? And summer is always a funny time for me because this is when I'm, teaching a little bit less and have a little bit more free time. And I swear I need like a whole 2 weeks to do all the preventative things at my age, right? Like last year it was the colonoscopy and like just all the, every year, the dermatologist, the, the regular doctor, right? My therapist, I see much more regularly than those folks, right? But and then there's always these like, you got to get this checked, you got to get this checked, you got to get this checked, you got to get this checked. And I have a mother-in-law that's like, I am not doing that. The mammogram, she says to me, every time I go get a mammogram, there's a problem, and they make me come back, and then it's nothing. And I'm trying to like be there with her in that moment, right? But then in my head, my automatic response is until it's not. So like thankfully you have gone a lot, and thankfully they are perceptive and they think they see things and they dig deeper and it was nothing. And now I'm like being really patronizing, but like that's a celebration. That's not an annoyance, you know? And so, yeah, did that take a lot of time? Yes. I think I'm hearing her say you have a lot of fear around it and you don't, you know, you gave up a lot of time. It's scary to you. And then it's all for nothing because you didn't have any cancer anyways. You know, and it's like, well, that's the whole reason. Because, you know, God forbid, or whoever's in charge of all of this, that you go and they do find something and it is something, or worse. You know, I have an aunt who just recently, the years are getting muddled now, so maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, was really sick, really very close to dying. Turns out AIDS. Like in 2023 or whatever, who thinks of a late 50, early 60-year-old woman? Even her doctor was like, oh, you've only ever had sex with men though, right? And I'm like, why would he say that? How else would you have gotten HIV? Like, I don't know. I know. Thanks, Marissa. That was my reaction too. I'm like, okay, but why did she have AIDS? Because she never got tested for HIV. Why? Because she didn't think she needed to. Turns out she did. Turns out she had AIDS for a good 10 years. Thank goodness. If you're ever going to get diagnosed with HIV or AIDS, do so in the United States of America right now, because within 6 months, she was undetectable. And now she will die of something else. Unlike when I started this work, um, in the early 90s down at OU, I worked with the Ryan White program. People were still just dying, and there was nothing that we could do. And so people will say, like, the best way to prevent dying of an STD is to not have sex. And it's like, I don't know that that's the best way, not to like project values onto people. I think the best way to prevent dying of HIV or AIDS is getting tested for HIV. And again, that's because I'm old enough to know people who got it non-sexually. And then also just because thinking you know or thinking you know what your partner doesn't mean it doesn't help, right? The only way to know is the test. But there again, why would anyone get tested unless they think they had partners who might have given it to them or whatever? When I worked at Rape and Sexual Assault Services, people would generally want an HIV test, but they weren't all testing positive from their assault. Some of them were just positive. So again, we don't often think of that, you know, that would technically be secondary prevention because we didn't prevent the virus, but now we're going to try to like, what's the word? I want to say alleviate. The word in my brain is alleviate, but that's not the word. We want to remediate maybe, or no, we want to suppress. I'm just going to use that word. It's not the right one. The consequences of that. Right. So if we know we are HIV positive right away, there are all sorts of things that we can do. Once we wait a certain amount of time, you know, there are parts of her health that won't ever recover because of the delay of the diagnosis. But it was there. So the leading causes of death in the United States, though, now are still currently heart disease, stroke, cancer. And so the two most important things that we can do is take care of our bodies through healthy nutrition and activity. And some of that activity, as I will say, also includes the resting stages of sleep. But those are the three things that are primarily killing people. And so that's, you know, I go to the doctor, they're like, well, Lori, you need to like manage your stress and lose some weight. And are you sure you gave up caffeine? Right? And it's like, okay, I hear you. I know those are the things. Thank you for your, you know, very important diagnosis of my what I need to do. Now help me do it, right? And it's like I live the thing, I teach the stuff, and still trying to actualize it all can be a little bit tricky. So when we're thinking about prevention, just real quick, I knew I threw it in there kind of fast, and those of you who aren't with us in health ed or public health. So primary prevention is getting in front of things before there's ever really an issue. That's why folks like me like to teach health in like elementary school, because then we can, I don't want to teach in an elementary school. I want health to be taught by qualified people in elementary school. So that as we're younger, we learn that our bodies can be healthier if we take better care of them. And this is what better care might be, right? We respect our heart, we respect our lungs, we respect our brains, we respect our whatever. Um, Primary prevention. Secondary prevention is there's already been some stuff, right? So I work primarily with emerging adults, undergraduate and graduate students. And so generally it's secondary prevention, right? There are plenty of people who take my human sexuality class that have not ever participated in any kind of sexual activity, but they have ideas, they have some education, they have some things that they already believe to be true. And then generally there is some amount of experience with different levels of physical interaction with another person. And so generally that is secondary prevention. And then tertiary prevention, unfortunately, usually finds us when we're in kind of a serious disease state. So if we're in a hospital and we've just had a heart attack or a stroke or something, and then the dietitian wants to come in and talk to us, or the social worker wants to come in and talk to us about, how can we help you change these things now that you have this kind of serious consequence. So the main agenda of prevention is as early as possible so that the things are preventable, even the things that scare us, right? Like the HIV, like the cancer. Not knowing we have it is more dangerous. Because if we have it, we have it. And ignorance can be bliss. If we don't know, we don't have to worry about it or think about it or be scared about it, but it's still taking from us. It's taking some of that morbidity, and it might even be taking mortality. And so those are the reasons that we hope to inspire people to think about the preventative measures that they might be able to take, which does not mean not have any fun, because mental health is in there, spiritual health is in there, emotional health is in there, and we need joy, we need connection, we need pleasure, we need fun, we need play. So it's not about reducing everything. It's not about making us all on this extra level of generalized anxiety about how all of the things around us can kill us. But it is about being a little bit more mindful and having a little bit more intention in the ways in which we act. And the more we start paying attention, the more we realize when I'm already hungry, I'm going to make not so great of a food choice as if I had like kind of planned ahead, right? If I already thought about when I was going to bed versus just waiting till I'm exhausted and now I'm falling asleep in a chair, different. If I already thought about how I might prevent an STI or a pregnancy or a sexual assault, right? If I already thought about my bicycle helmet, my motorcycle helmet, so on and so forth, it does give me that little bit of an extra step away from morbidity as well as mortality. So anyways, not a terrible conversation with myself, right, Mallory? I mean, I only lost it a couple of times. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you all so much for being here. As usual, this will be posted and I don't know, there's a lot of interesting questions for those of us that aren't here tonight. So thanks so much, y'all.